All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sure do appreciate everybody coming. A nice packed room here on this soon-to-be very cold morning. So appreciate Senator Dahms and Representative Swedzinski for making Marshall the first of your many stops today. It's a very busy day for them. So again, a very busy session. It starts in about 1 month, a little bit over 1 month, and we have a lot of good topics to talk about. Again, one of the very few, if not the only, split legislatures in America. So it always makes a very interesting dynamic for our representative in our center. So I'm not going to take any more of their time because we usually fill a full hour. So I'm going to have you take it there.
Sponsoring this, want to thank the Marshall Chamber for doing this. Also want to thank the YMCA for allowing us to use this space. We truly do appreciate it. And mostly thank you folks for getting up early and being here and taking time out of your day to meet with us. We like to have these meetings before session and after session because it gives us an opportunity to talk to you folks about what's on your minds and how legislation will or has affected you. And you probably have questions on things that are coming up. So we always appreciate doing this, and we like to keep the front part here short so we can get to the questions. This year's a bonding bill. This year's a bonding year, also a policy year. And with the, we do have a $1.3 million surplus, and that $1.3 million is after we've taken out several million to put into a rainy day fund. And with that contribution we made today, or made this year, with the surplus, we now have our rainy day fund up to what the scheduled part we wanted to be at. So we are very fortunate that we have a pretty good amount of money into the rainy day fund. And we do have a surplus, so there's a possibility that we would have a supplementary budget. I don't know that that'll happen. We have not met with the House to see what they want to do. We're going to have a meeting tomorrow and kind of decide what direction as a Senate majority that we want to go with the surplus and some of those things. So, and there were some things that didn't get taken care of last year that we will move forward onto the burner this year. There was some insulin issues that we just weren't ready. We just didn't have things in place to move a bill that we felt would be the bill that would be the best for the constituents. So we'll probably get a bill moved fairly early in the process on that. And then there's some stuff with the DHS that's coming about over the summer, and some inappropriate spending and things like that. So we will be dealing with some issues with that, plus other policies. So at this time, I will turn it over to Chris, and then he'll make some statements, and then we'll open it up for comments and concerns.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks everyone for coming this morning. You know, I think this section really will be focused, obviously, from a bonding perspective, just because that's a natural kind of what the focus will be. You know, that's anyone's guess, but it'll probably be around that $1 billion to smaller range, if not even smaller. But obviously, there's a lot of wants and needs across the state. The bonding committees have been traveling throughout the state. We've had hosted the Senate, also the House here in Marshall, to look at some of the local projects and the local needs, whether it be from a water project up in the northern part of the district to potential projects here in Marshall. So that will likely be kind of a larger portion of the conversation, but also from a policy perspective. Gary touched on a few of those, but you know, from agriculture, from a tax perspective, you know, 179s, and there's a lot of issues that were kind of left on the cutting room floor at the end of the session that I really believe that need to be brought back to the forefront and move forward. Especially in those particular areas. We have a lot of businesses across the state that seem to be running on all cylinders, but obviously in our neck of the woods, it's a little bit different with certain sectors of our economy, agriculture particularly. And so it's our guess that we'll be continuing to do some work in that area as well. And yeah, with that, we'll kind of jump it real quick into what you guys want to talk about, and I'm sure we won't be a shortage of words, so go ahead.
Comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I won't be bashful. Brad Roach, General Manager, Marshall Municipal Utilities. The House Energy Committee will meet. We believe you'll probably wind up in that committee again, Chris.
Yeah, that usually doesn't change per every 2 years.
Well, last year I know there's a lot of conversation about going to 100% something, right? Renewable energy, make it a mandate, or at least some variations of that. We recently began a new program in Marshall. I'm sitting with my friend Tim O'Leary from Lion Lincoln Electric Co-op. They have a similar program that you shared with me. where any of our customers can go to 100% renewable if they want to voluntarily. We created that program. It's in place today. Some already are doing that. And it's, so I just want to put that out there as you think about and discuss with your colleagues mandatory 100%. There's other ways to do this where we could give everybody a choice to voluntarily go to 100%. So just want to put that out there. And thanks for always supporting consumer-owned utilities. We're owned by the people as you consider legislation.
Well, certainly, and I think that's a good point is, oftentimes with co-ops or local utilities, folks are looking to the state to make a statewide mandate and say, well, this is what the people want. Well, if that's what the people want, and they already elect a board, they already elect local folks with Lion Lincoln or within the city of Marshall, that's what they can do. They can ask their folks to do it. They don't need to come to the legislature and demand from a top-down perspective what they want from their energy needs. And from an individual standpoint, folks can choose if that's what they want. They can say, I want to have solar, they want to have this, or they want to have that. But I think the fault comes is when you have a statewide mandate, that's where the costs dramatically potentially increase. And to a person, every single policy proposal that moved forward in my committee, I asked, so what will this make a difference? And to a person, they said, well, it won't really make a difference globally, but we just need to do the right thing. Well, that's fine and dandy when you're dealing with someone else's pocketbook. When you're dealing with your own, I think we need to be a little bit more careful. And just a message to the people in the background, you don't have to pay extra if you sit in the front row. So.
And talking about energy, we talk about 100% renewable, but too many times what they forget to do is figure out the actual cost and what it's going to increase the cost to the consumer. It's amazing within just the last 3 to 4 years how much the cost of energy has went up. It's went up enough that now that's one of the issues that people are looking at when they decide to move or not to move to Minnesota, business-wise, is the cost of energy. 10 years ago, there was a pyramid of things they looked at. Energy really was very low. Today, that's moved to quite a higher position because of the increase in the cost. And green energy does very well as long as it's subsidized. But when those subsidies drop out, then things change drastically. So it's something that has to be carefully planned, and we need to make sure we know where we're at as this is being moved forward. But remember, it's an election year next year, or this year, so we're going to hear a lot of themes and a lot of dreams, and that's kind of the way it works. And they'll get things out there, and then they'll try to put one person against another in the election and this and that and debate it and all these good things. But so much of this stuff, when the election's over, it slows down, kind of goes by the wayside. But this won't go by the wayside. But certainly, I think the intensity of it will slow down once the election's over. Other questions, concerns?
Well, thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Speaking of mandates,
Brad.
let's talk about the workforce mandates that seem to percolate every single year but don't get anywhere. And then I'm talking about specifically the preemption bill, the one-size-fits-all type of mandates. Can we ever get anywhere on this kind of legislation that's important for business?
It's going to be pretty hard. We keep making little dents, and you make a little move here and there. But to do it the way it should be done, it gets pretty hard, because you would have to have all three branches of the same party in order to move that forward, and it'd have to be the Republican Party, because the other party is not going to move that forward. And they believe that different communities ought to be able to design what they want in the way they want to do it. And there was some challenges last year with Minneapolis by the state, and we didn't get very far. And we just don't have the support across the broad arena we need it, and also we don't have the votes in the House in order to make it happen. So we will keep working at it, because we put that's a piece that we have in the final policy bill every year, and we negotiate, and we always get a little piece of something. But if the more we do that, the longer we get those little pieces, the stronger it gets for us. So we're not going to give up on it.
Well, I think there's some areas where we have preemption, but others that we don't. And whether it be the minimum wage issue or a lot of other plastic bags or different things. You know, we did make some small inroads just on meeting notices, where counties had to have a certain amount of time before a meeting would take place or whatever to discuss something. And we moved some of those rules and stuff into the cities as well, just because, you know, obviously cities in our area aren't necessarily a problem, but there are some other areas of the state where it's a real challenge if you're a small business owner or a family person trying to keep up with what policy decisions are going to be made at a local level, so that you have the adequate notice and have the understanding of what's moving forward. And so, you know, it is kind of a nibble around the edges thing, you know, but we do what we can when we can, and that's the interesting part is doing it. You know, the first year of the biennium, which was last year, you know, everyone says, well, that's just the budgetary year, and this is the year for policy. Well, oftentimes the leverage that you have for policy is finances, or finances for policy. And so oftentimes, sometimes you'll trade one for the other, or, you know, make policy decisions and financial decisions joint together. And so because there is a little bit of a surplus, there may be a little bit more of that, because there'll be more leverage on both sides for kind of, believe it or not, there is leverage used in St. Paul.
The bill that Chris was referring to, what that did is if you had a military person on your city council or on your county commissioner board, and they had to be at some meetings or training or something, in the past some counties and some cities have just had the people call in and counted that as part of the quorum. There was some real debate about that, and there was some challenges on that. So what we did is clean the language up. So if you're in the military and you're on the city council in Marshall and you're in training in Little Falls, this would allow the person in Little Falls to Skype into the city council meeting, and they would be able to be counted as part of your quorum. So that was where the change was there. Other questions or concerns? Yes?
Sir, Paul Lee with Minnesota West Community Technical College, and you're talking about workforce. I just wanted to extend appreciation for the 81 workforce development scholarships that we have coming to our region to help encourage people to come and stay and train here in southwestern Minnesota. With South Dakota, we have some major competition with their educational institutions where they jump across the border, and that'll be a tremendous opportunity for our students in this area and this region. So I do appreciate that tremendously on that one. Also wanted to thank you for the HEAPR support that you've had on that one. HEAPR is to help keep us clean, safe, and dry on our campuses, and for our area, it's very important to have those resources with SMSU and with Minnesota West, and have our regional colleges here. And from an agricultural standpoint, Chris, you had mentioned on 179, appreciate you keeping on tax conformity on that one. Also farm with our family. Just as something to keep in mind, like we had 40% of our crops that didn't get planted this year. I was talking to one farmer, asked how harvest was. He said, well, we had 25 acres and we normally do 600. So just the impact locally of not having that grain sold, I think is going to be quite interesting. And so just keep an eye out for those things. I know you guys have a great ear for agriculture, and just be aware of those. So.
Well, thank you, Paul. We do appreciate it. You were talking about the workforce. That's one program we've heard a lot about with what you were talking about with the scholarships and stuff at the college. We've heard that from other schools, that it's been very important for them. So thank you for bringing that up. And you're certainly right. We do have some serious problems in agriculture, and we look at our problems here, and then we get up to Crookston and up in that area, and it's multiplied several fold. It's really unfortunate, and hopefully the weather straightens out and we aren't back into the same thing in the next year. And it always is a gamble, but we've had too many years of gambles here, and so hopefully things will get straightened around. We did some things at the legislature last year to try to just help a little bit here and there, and hopefully this year we can increase some funding in the young farmer area to support that, and then also on the rural development dollars, if we could do some things there to help get some more dollars out there through the Department of Ag. So those are things we'll be working on and looking at.
This is more geared toward Gary, because you and I had a conversation a little bit yesterday, Chris, and you alluded to it, Gary. DHS is going to be a pain in the where. With the payback that's coming back, there's a lot of talk about, the governor said the counties aren't going to be held liable for it. Who's going to be held liable? Should it come out of the rainy day fund or the $1.3 million reserve, or do we make DHS finally be accountable for what they're doing?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's not easily answered. Because right now, one of the issues we have is it's very hard to find accountability. And we have not had somebody that was high on accountability managing that organization. So when we've went through 2 commissioners under Governor Walz, we're on the 3rd one. Now the 3rd one is a different program. This gal came from, she was a director of the Lutheran Social Services. She came in and she has a very good understanding of the process, and she has a very good understanding what should be done. She's getting a pretty good grasp on what failed to be done, and she believes in accountability. One of the problems we have is some of the things that were done are actually punishable by law. There was crimes committed in some of these transactions. But in order to get that punishment or to get the crimes tried, you have to have the people above those people willing to do that. And so far, we don't have a governor that's willing to do it, and we don't have attorney general that's willing to do it. So with that setup, what we end up doing is we try to find out where these issues are, and what tipped a lot of this off was a legislative audit. And so in the last 6 months, probably, since the legislative audit, the first one was 26 to 28 million, which the counties were part of that. And then the second one was 103 million, and now the last one of the last 3 weeks or so is 53 million. Now when you talk to these folks, you think they would say, boy, this is embarrassing. They look at you like, why are you talking to us about such a small amount? Last year, we had to pass a statute, we had to pass legislation that required certain things to be done to stop the duplicate payments. Now, the comment was made that, well, I don't see why we would even want to spend our time for something under $5 million. Now, that's the problem when you get that kind of thinking. When you get this such a big it's the biggest agency we have. It's the most, they spend the most money. I mean, they are responsible. That is the biggest part of our general fund budget. And so when it gets that big, it gets pretty much unmanageable. And it's so easy for things to happen that nobody's keeping anybody accountable on. And so when you try to bring that thing together, first of all, in some of the stuff, documents that were there earlier now somehow got misplaced. Well, those are issues. Unfortunately, we have a system, as far as the computer system, that is not as updated as it should be. And so it makes errors pretty easy. And then especially if you're looking at to make that error. So we've got a couple of options. The lady that's heading it right now, she would like some time to see if she can get it straightened out, and I think that she can. The question is, how long is that going to take? Because if there's leakage, some of it's still happening, and we need to get to the bottom of that. The other option is to split Department of Health and Human Services, split it up in possibly 2 different categories. And then in the process of doing that, where it's going to get tough, is you have to decide what's going to go by the wayside because it's probably not needed, and what kind of things you're going to do to instill accountability and have measures to know that that's happening. So it is something that we definitely will be working and spending a lot of time on. The governor is now creating a task force, and that task force will decide what their thoughts are, if we should be splitting it up, if so, how. And that'll be made up of people pretty much out of the system. So
if I can follow up, Gary, so with that, what you said, is CMS going to allow us to be, is there a time where CMS is going to ask for that money back by a certain date, or are you going to have that time with this legislative session to get that done?
Well, that's the debate that will be had. We have not, we're not in session. So we really haven't done much debate on this piece. Now, I know there's been a lot of discussion where the Native Americans were involved because of the paperwork and stuff they have. We really probably are not, I mean, I don't see that they're going to be paying that back because they were misled as to what they were doing was fine. And I think that's somewhat where some of the counties got brought into this. And so I'm sure we're going to have some discussion about who's going to be responsible for those dollars. And I think it's a mistake when we're going to come back to the counties and say to you that you need to make these dollars up when you were told that what you were doing was fine and that the payments were correct, and just do it.
Well, I think, yeah, just to add a little bit to that. I mean, just to give some other folks, so, I mean, there's so much wanton waste within this area. It sounds like small numbers to folks that are working within the budget, but it's really big stuff. There was one particular email that they got through a data request that said, this was the gist of the email was the financial check, the money transfer, wire bank transfer that we sent to this group was rejected by Department of Homeland Security because of security reasons. So the follow-up emails was, we're going to try sending them a physical check to see if that will go through. Or maybe you say, maybe you shouldn't send the money. You know, if the Department of Homeland Security doesn't think this organization is actually doing what they say they're doing, maybe you just don't send it. And so that's just a snippet of some of the issues that we're having with this agency and the wanton waste. I mean, I think of other areas that we could spend $100 million, like group homes for folks working with the disabled, where these folks are day in and day out slaving away, working for pennies on the dollar and doing some of the world's toughest work. And yet somehow this agency doesn't have a problem wasting hundreds of millions of dollars, but yet we shortchange these workers that are right in the front lines taking care of people that are our friends and neighbors. And from a budget standpoint, I think that should be a policy position that we take as well, that we fund those folks, but from a wanton waste, like the agencies need to come up with the money because they're wasting it. And if we can't hold something as simple, and you talked a little bit, well, if these issues don't get figured out while we're in session, it's my guess is that they won't. Because in the State House, we've been begging and pleading for the State House, Speaker Hortman, to have hearings on this, to actually look into it in depth, as the Senate has been doing. And finally, the battering ram got to open the door. But yet, even still, it was such a narrow focus. And so, government waste and accountability doesn't have to be a partisan issue. It can be very bipartisan. So, we don't have to protect people. We can say, hey, there was wrong done here. Let's open it up. Let's have a conversation about it. Because guess what? If you can't do that, how are we going to improve it? And, holding counties, holding one group of entities, so said counties, but not other groups, and saying, well, you don't have to pay it back, but you do. I mean, come on. That's, especially when you're dealing with taxpayers. I mean, this is all taxpayer money, right? So whether it's coming to the local or where it's going or what, but I think they need to come up with the finances and whatever. But.
Just one final note on that. The most recent snafu that we just found was Department of Health and Human Services has several grants that are given out. And so one of the ladies in the office that handles the grants is on one of the nonprofit boards. Now that's a conflict of interest. But not only is she on the nonprofit board and works in the office of the grants, she's in the group that decides who gets the grants. And this one particular nonprofit, and how it kind of boiled up is it looked kind of strange because their grants were always about the same and always considerably higher in the pile of grants. Well, and she just feels she's doing absolutely nothing wrong. And we had another situation to where an individual was removed because of inappropriate actions financially. So she was moved from the Department of DHS, but the way they removed her, is she was appointed to a different agency at a higher level and higher pay. So it makes it very interesting. But I do want to make a comment on the majority of the people that work for Health and Human Services work very hard, do a very good job and are really dedicated to their jobs. But it's just a few of these folks here and there that think that they're above the system and how it operates and they can make decisions outside the statutes are the ones that are causing all these problems. And so it's really unfortunate when you have people that go to work every day, not only in St. Paul, but out in the rural areas and stuff, and do their job very well and put in the extra hours, and then they get paid with a broad brush. So we really don't want to do that neither. So other concerns or comments? Yes?
Doug Simon, Marshall. Just want to thank you for being great reps for Marshall and Southwest region. I want to turn to higher education and talk about bonding. As you know, with bonding, state agencies, they pay zero debt service on bonding. Yet higher education institutions, they have to pay their debt service. And in my view, I just think campuses across the state of Minnesota have over-mortgaged themselves. And I'm looking at the surplus. Is there any appetite, one, to perhaps pay down the debt service on some of these campuses and get them more fiscally responsible? And then second, whether there's an appetite to look at bonding overall.
Well, that's an interesting perspective on it. I mean, so essentially what you're saying, Doug, is local students or the campuses themselves take local dollars that they raise through tuition and fees and whatnot to help service some of the debt, essentially, correct? And, you know, what his idea is that rather than just giving a blank check to higher education, maybe specificize it to debt service so that, one, the fees and the costs can be lower, but it's not this general use, so it's actually for the physical building. And I think it's a very unique idea, and I think something like that should potentially move forward because I think it would really focus it in on debt service and cost to students without being essentially diluted in other areas.
Other questions? Yes?
John DeCramer. You know, with bonding bill coming up, affordable housing, workforce housing is going to be probably a key part of that. One of the aspects of those fundings is when it comes to, I'll say primarily money that goes to single-family developments, which Marshall's in about a 3-year phase here through UCAP, doing about 15 homes. That the wages paid there are Davis-Bacon wages. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion back and forth in the administration of what applies, and yes, people who build houses should be able to afford them. But there is a cap that's quite a few years old that was put on the value of projects and when Davis-Bacon kicks in. And it would be good if you could take a look at that and see, is there a way of maybe excluding some of these single-family homes that are being financed through the bonding, and see if we can get a little bit more home for less cost to the workforce housing and the affordable housing.
How many more homes do you think could be built if we didn't do that? Or if we did do that?
Well, you know, you're looking at some cases another 10-15% of the cost. So, you know, that's fairly math out of there. So, yeah, we're going to get more homes coming out of there. And yeah, it's based on a cap that was put on several years back and just hasn't been renewed as the cost of housing and everything else is going on.
Could you email us that information so that we have that? Because I think you got a very good point there. There's been a lot of complaints out in rural Minnesota about when we do these projects, the cost is so much higher than if a contractor come in, local contractor, and built that same house without being tied into the housing authority program. So it's something we really do need to look at, and if we can get that base, we'd know where to go. Yep. Yep. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Chad Adams with the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership, and I was actually going to speak to the same questions with housing in general. We're a nonprofit community development corporation that services 30 counties in southwest Minnesota and south central Minnesota. As I've been meeting with communities and counties, the top two issues that I hear are housing issues, child care issues. There might be a broadband issue. But to the gentleman's point, there's a workforce housing grant program through Minnesota Housing that is probably not sufficiently funded to meet the needs of greater Minnesota. But one of the requirements is state prevailing wages on some of these multifamily projects. what we're finding as a developer, it's one of the things we do is that the cost for the labor increased by 60 to 80%, which essentially wipes out the benefit of the grant itself. So communities aren't even applying for it because there's really no economic benefit for it. But we're also hearing from employers as well too that they can't find employees or recruit and attract employees to greater Minnesota, primarily because of the cost of construction or some other barriers in the housing industry. So what type of things do you see happening during this session in terms of bonding or policy that might be able to advance, and how can we help provide advocacy?
Well, yeah, I highly doubt that we'll see any change in that particular area when it comes to prevailing wage, just with the current administration. I mean, even though something is, you can come to committee with a common sense, if I could invite you up to the Capitol to say that in committee, to say, literally, if you apply for the grant, the increased cost, so you get this X amount of dollars, the increased cost that comes with it simply goes to prevailing wage because you're mandated to pay a higher rate than you could locally get the job done. I mean, it literally falls on deaf ears. So, and I understand there's politics around prevailing wage and raising the cost. And I built water treatment plants to put myself through college, and some of the projects we did were, state money or local money, and the amount of pay was different because of these issues. But and the rules surrounding the project and the way they would work are much different. And so, if this is really about building houses, this is really about, what is our main goal here? If it's about, putting people in places that are safe to live, well, okay, then let's make a decision. If it's this, then let's do this. But, but I think we need to have an honest discussion on what the impacts are. And, if this is about building buildings and doing what people want to do, then, I don't think we're accomplishing that goal with that, so.
Well, it's certainly an issue, and we've had many, many discussions at the legislative body about about prevailing wage. We've had some bills, and in most cases couldn't get them out of committee because we couldn't get the votes to do that. And so, but it's something we talk about every year. When we get $2 in bonding, last year we put $60 million into the housing arena. This year, usually we're in that 100 million or so. So I would assume this year we'll be back in that same area. It is a bonding year, and we usually look at housing and some of those stables like that we know need to have some support. Usually we look at those pretty favorable. I know you could use a lot more than 100 million throughout the state of Minnesota, but we have so many things that need needs, so we try to help the different areas out. But I'm sure we'll have a pretty respectable bonding bill again this year for housing. Yep. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Yes.
Deb Brandt, United Community Action Partnership. Thank you, first of all, for your support for public transportation. One of the areas that we're seeing difficulty in was in our volunteer driver program because of the mileage reimbursement rate. And just to put a bug in your ear, that there's a coalition working on getting some language change so that those volunteers can be reimbursed at about the federal rate again, because we are losing a lot of volunteers, and those are lifelines for the elderly in our community. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Becky Tendetzel. I'm the Executive Director for Women's Rural Advocacy Program. We're the domestic abuse program for Lion, Lincoln, Redwood, and Yellow Medicine counties. Over the last couple of years, the number of clients that we've seen reaching out to our organization has almost doubled. One of the increases, and it kind of piggybacks off the previous comments, that we've run into is affordable housing for our clients. So it kind of piggybacks off what they were saying, is a lot of times we'll have men and women come in that are victims of domestic violence, and they're trying to leave a relationship to be safe, and they are not able to do that because they don't have any place to go. They can't afford the housing and being able to pay rent or take on a home loan. So the affordable housing piece in this area, I would like to stress, is really, really important. The other thing is the Violence Against Women Act, which is a federal organization or is federally funded. has not been renewed, as which I'm sure you know. And a lot of our funding comes through the Violence Victims of Crime Act. And they're taking money out of the Victim of Crime Act to fund VAWA right now. And in a couple years, we are looking at cuts of 30 to 50% to the grants that we are receiving. And what my concern is, or my question is the state looking at what we can do to help fund and replace that money if those cuts came through. Because like I said, we have doubled the number of clients reaching out to our organization.
So who's making the cuts?
It's coming from, it will be coming from the federal.
So the federal's making the cuts, and then you said they're taking money from one place and moving it over to
Violence
another.
Against Women Act.
So who's moving the money from one place to the other?
I'm not exactly sure
Okay.
who's doing that.
Yep.
But it is being moved from one to the other.
So is that being done, do you think, by the inter associations?
Yes,
Okay, so it's something controlled, okay, I understand. Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
And if our funding is cut from 30 to 50%, right now, this last year, we served over 615 clients. And if they are looking at making cuts, we are going to lose staff, the amount of resources to help these people. Our transportation budget is a big piece of our budget. We're in a rural area, and I have 5 advocates to cover a 4-county area. A lot of the barriers that the clients that we work with have are transportation issues. You know, they don't have reliable transportation, or they don't have access. So we use our personal vehicles to go and meet with clients where they're comfortable. So, I mean, it's just, there's a whole lot, and I can go on forever, but.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I do not sit on the Health and Human Services Committee, so I don't see a lot of things like that until they get passed out of the committee. So I appreciate you bringing that up to make us, Chris and I, both more aware of what your issues are.
And we are
Absolutely.
funded through the Office of Justice programs, is where our funding comes through, and that's where our overtime is. So I know that the Violence Free Minnesota Coalition will be talking to our representatives, and I just want to open the door if you ever want to come and visit and sit down and talk.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
You bet. Thank you. Other comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
Lee Carlson at
Yes.
Alton.
How you doing, Lee?
Just a question. Have you heard many problems with the new type of licensing, driver's license? My wife it's been about 3 months and she's applied and apparently hasn't received it yet. Maybe it's just an individual situation. Have you heard much about that?
Yes, there has been a considerable change. Fortunately, Governor Walz was willing to say to the system that we were currently working with Minlars was not working, and he agreed. And so he allowed for an outside organization to come in, and they have done a lot of good things. It used to be if you got your new license or your new ID license, if you got that within 3 months, you're pretty fortunate. Now, it's if you haven't got it in 3 months, there might be some glitch or hang up that you want to check on, because what we're finding in the town hall meetings we had yesterday, what we were hearing is that people that were out past 3 months, when they called in, they would find there was a piece of information that was missing. Now, was it true, had it gotten lost in the shuffle or whatever? One that seems to come up quite a bit is matching the IDs with the rest of the paperwork. And so that was one that seemed to come up quite a bit, but it is much better. However, it still has a way to go, but it's a much better system and it's working much better. And now not only do we have the 7, but all your license bureaus now have the capability of providing that new license. So, but I appreciate you bringing that up, because they're still working on some of that stuff. Yep.
Give them a call.
Yeah.
Our offices, those are things, calls our offices can make too. So if you've got something you've been waiting on a long time, we can kind of just give a call in and just see your or whatever, but I think you're maybe a little bit on the long side there potentially.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Other questions, concerns, comments? Yes, Brad?
So a couple years ago, the two of you, along with Senator Weber, were in this room to have a child care
Yes.
town hall of sorts. Where are we at with child care legislation? I know it seems like it's parts of bills and sometimes in the last couple of years. What's the plan for this year?
Well, I think, obviously we've got a long ways to go. A lot of the issues that we're seeing and hearing from providers are still there. I think, we have a new administration, and so that potentially, but, obviously we're dealing within that department, Health and Human Services, which is a lot of some of that oversight. They're big, and so it's maybe something we're not hearing about as much just because of the other areas within that agency are so large and kind of yelling and screaming, but they're still there. Hearing from folks and the overregulation and the rest, and just the lack of common sense. And one of the things that we had heard during that town hall was really, can we change the amount of children? So just from an access standpoint, if you have someone that's willing to provide, and we were looking at, we created some bills potentially to just change it through law, but there are it's a lot more complicated than that. And so oftentimes we want to have this simple solution with a sledgehammer out. We got to be a little bit more graceful. So
Those town hall meetings that you were talking about, Brad, we had, I think it was 4 throughout the state of Minnesota, and the common theme that kept coming up was regulation. And so what we were finding is there was a lot of differences of how daycares were being regulated from one community to another community, and it really varied as you got from the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state. So one thing that is being worked on is to have a more focused operation in St. Paul so that everybody's operating under the same regulations, whether you're in Worthington or Winnebago or way up north. Eventually, everybody will be operating under the same regulations. And in defense of the county folks, many times the information they were getting as far as the regulations would be different than maybe a different county was getting that was working with a different person in St. Paul. So that's being worked on. They're going through and taking a look at an awful lot of the regulations that we currently have to see how many of those can be taken a look at, and maybe some more common sense regulation. I mean, in the one case, a lady got a violation because she has a 4-year-old in daycare. When the licensed person was there, the 4-year-old in the daycare went into the bathroom and closed the door. And she got a violation because you can't have a child that age in a bathroom with a closed door. Now, what do you teach your children at home? You go to the bathroom and close the door. Another lady got a violation and a fine because she had a plunger in the bathroom. Well, the philosophy was by this licensed person that child may sit down on the toilet and turn the plunger over and start chewing on it. Well, so what are you going to be better off? Have the plunger taken out of the bathroom, or have a child, when the toilet floods, have the child walking through all that matter? And, just some things just aren't using common sense. And so I think there was an awful lot of those that just kind of went on. And those are the ones that we're saying, okay, folks, we need to get some common sense here, and we need to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing to be doing. So last year also, I think it was 16 things that was given to the department that they had to come up with solutions for, and the last of those will be giving to us in January. So there's some headways, but it's very slow.
Yep. And just one more kind of one of those anecdotal stories, but I had someone come and tell me that they have a daycare in their home, and under state law, you're not technically supposed to be able to conceal and carry in a home daycare. So that's state law. So you're carrying a pistol around. The husband concealed and carry a lot with his work and whatever he did. They felt that he needed to get a note from his wife that he could conceal and carry in his own home. So I just said that because it was interesting.
There's many, many more like that. Other questions or concerns?
We have about 10 more minutes. We have what time? I know that Governor Walz is in town today.
I think he's up at the college.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, I think there's
Yes, sir.
coffee. Go ahead.
What's the chances this 179 being coincided with the feds? The state of Minnesota, we can deduct 25%.
Yep.
So we don't get the balance back for 5 years. So we're paying the tax up front. And you take somebody trades a $200,000 combine for $300,000, he's paying tax on that $200,000 up front.
Yep.
Well, how about getting this changed to coincide with the feds?
That's what we'd like to do. Just kind of another story. We just had a bulk petroleum retailer up in the northern part of the district. Because of it went back. So when the ruling went for 179, he traded something in 18, and so essentially they have to amend the return for 18 taxes, and it's going to mean he's got to just come up with an extra like $12,000 or $15,000, just kind of in a small part of that. And so I think the better we can do it, I forget what the exact number is, but I believe it's in that particular area, it's maybe $250 million to do. It's a big hunk. So. That's whenever you're talking tax policy, you have to think of it like a spend bill, right? So even though you think, oh, well, we should count giving people their own money back as spending, but essentially that's, so let's say you're going to put $100 million into, playgrounds or something like that as a cost of government, you have to look at it as a tax bill the same way. And so, that's going to be put in the mix, and it is a pretty big bite, and looking at $1.3 billion surplus, it's going to be weighed in, and I hope, I think if anyone's at the governor's meeting today, although I would be there, but we've already made other plans for the rest of the day, so you can ask them about that.
We actually had Section 179 in the tax bill, and we got a negotiation in the conference committee to keep it in, and we had to give the House some things they wanted, but we had it in right up to the end. And in the last final negotiations on the tax bill, we lost it. We couldn't keep it in. The cost of putting it in was just way too high, and we didn't have the funds to do that. But it's something that every year we work on, and like you said, we're at 25%, so that was kind of a start. But if we have a supplemental budget bill, it will be in the tax bill. Some form or another of that will be in the tax bill again this year if we can get it. We'll get it off the Senate floor, and we'll probably be able to negotiate it into the final bill, and then it'll be the question if we can get it all the way home out of the final bill. It will take a big chunk out of our surplus that we have, but we have a surplus, and the reason we have a surplus is because we've probably overtaxed. So if we've overtaxed, then maybe we need to be looking at doing some things to get those taxes back into the communities. So that's, it will be looked at again. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I usually ask about healthcare, wondering there's a lot of things going on right now due to the cost of healthcare, not only purchasing healthcare, but providing healthcare, insurance, the cost of healthcare premiums are just totally out of line. Is there something on the docket for any of those issues?
There are many things on the docket. I mean, there's a lot of starting, there's over at this point, let's get rid of the Affordable Care Act, to let's change the Affordable Care Act, to let's introduce some other options for insurance. One of them being allow a policy that's back like a major medical used to be, and allow that policy that people can buy, and they would have much more skin in the game when they have a claim, but it would drive the premium down quite a bit. So there's variations all the way through that, and that's at the state level. Then you have the federal level, and they're always looking at some different things to do, and there's changes coming through, which affects the premiums. And we did renew reinsurance for 2 more years. So the first was 19 and 20, and now it's renewed for 21 and 22. And in that meantime, we will be continually looking at ways of finding things that we can probably do some reductions in some of these costs. What we're finding the last couple of years, the biggest factor in increasing the cost has been the drugs. That's a real influence on additional cost. So last year we had a bill pertaining to pharmacy benefit managers and trying to get a lot more clarity and get it so that people can see really what's going on inside this system. Right now, it's pretty well, there's not many ways that you can really get inside that system and find out what's going on. So there was a bill passed on that, and there'll be some additional work done on that again this year. But it's a slow process, but Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just kind of an easy, very expensive, but an easy, is eliminating the tax within healthcare. So in Minnesota, we have the provider tax, which was due to go away, which is 2% across the board for everything, but through negotiations, that was lost and brought back. And so that's, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of additional cost that's artificially put into the cost of healthcare through taxation at the local, from the state level. And so,
But doesn't that tax go to pay for Minnesota Care?
some of it does, yeah. But, you know, I mean, if your goal is to lessen the cost of healthcare, that's one way you could do it. It's directly where the state is involved in it. So.
But it seems like people are getting directed to, if they can't afford to purchase insurance, well, you can go on Minnesota Care. Well, most people would prefer to be able to pay for their own coverage and not be on a public assistance type of program.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
I think now they're switched over to Minsure, but
Right.
it's, we took a very close look at that, and my philosophy was that of that 2%, we needed to find out what truly was going for what it was designed to go for. And then the rest we should eliminate. And that was designed to go for where it was going for, if we were going to eliminate the 2%, we would have to backfill that out of general fund money. And the actual bill went from 2% down to 1.75 because there was only that small percent that we could actually say is not being used in fields that we would have to backfill. So it was voted and it was kept in at that lower percentage because it had to be backfilled from somewhere. So it's not being backfilled from the right place. I mean, it should not be in, as Chris said, it shouldn't be in the medical side of it. It should be taken out of the general fund. The only problem with taking it out of the general fund is that can get a little, you know, that can get a little, it's not guaranteed. And it can be some real issues if you do that, because if somebody decides to take that out of there, where's the money going to come from for those programs that have been designed? And when you really get into them, they're pretty hard to eliminate, those particular ones. So, other questions or concerns?
And tort reform too.
Yes. Anything else?
Well, thank you, everyone. We can maybe stick around for a minute or two afterwards in case you want to come up or something, but there's still coffee left, I think, so.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming out. I sure appreciate it.